Perhaps we're all born in conflict, all forms of life. I got some fiberglass in my face, but I imagine as wonderful as one's upbringing might be, still not escaping this almost certain conflict. And to emphasize this, I'll use the Buddha, who was born in nobility and found conflict in this, and eventually left to wander the earth and find the truth. And I was born in Atlantic City, or Atlantis City. In my case, my parents came together with two different belief systems. My mother a Catholic, my father a Jew. This would leave me to question everything. I didn't feel like any belief system had all the answers. Both sides of my family were good people, but equally clueless to the bigger picture. This was a conflict within the home. And both of my parents spoke French from different parts of the realm, and we had different customs in the home. This again made me question reality. In some instances, I thought the French traditions were better than the American traditions that would surround me in my upbringing. And in other instances, I didn't. Everything just seemed strange to me. And now in this research, I think I'm appreciative because I never really clung to any belief system. It's left me open to question them all. And today I'm going to share a little personal story of my origins and how they may tie into the reset. Welcome. Well, this is a story I've been wanting to share for a while, but also I wish that I had more information. So I will not say that it's a fact. I often avoid such statements, but I wanted to talk about when the reset happened. Many people have been asking me lately to address the issue, so I will. It might take me 5 minutes or an hour. I hope it only takes 5 minutes. So when discussing the resets, I think it's often confused as far as, are we talking about the reset being the end or the beginning? Because there would be both. And I'll address both today. Now, I could compile a whole bunch of documents and bits of the narrative to show you certain proofs. And to some extent, I think that's what everybody that contributes in this community has done. But today I'm going to share my personal family history. Now, we could read the narrative all day long and come to conclusions, but then there's always our family history, something that is passed on, and perhaps the most important story in everybody's family. It could be attributed to a family creation story. Where do we come from? And I believe everybody has one, on both your mother and father's side. And again, we could research the narrative all day long, but at the end of the day, we would have to compare it to our own story, our own family history. And I believe in just a couple generations, you could corrupt a whole narrative, but a personal family story is a little less corruptible, in my opinion. And most importantly, I think we must all share these stories. And perhaps if we could piece all of these family stories together, we may find ourselves with a whole new history. So I'll begin with my mother's story, which is shorter. And from the earliest days of my youth, my mother told me we had Spanish and Norwegian, but she wasn't sure. Later she did her family tree, and the Spanish was gone. And again, I think that this whole DNA testing and family tree businesses are a joke, and I think part of the rewriting of the final bits of history. And this specific history that I'm talking about today, this family history. And they had almost successfully erased my history on a personal account. But I digress. What is certain is my mother is born in Canada, and so were both of her parents. A French-speaking Catholic family. And if this is all I had, it would remind me of the narrative in which we so often talk about on these channels. A reset people. I've talked about it before, and my grandparents absolutely poor. As a youth, my grandmother told me she had to wait in long lines for simple foods like butter and bread. And this is what I would call the reintroduction reset. The new arrivals appearing in the 1850s to early 1900s. Orphan trains, cities sprouting into existence as if they were already there. And this reset or reintroduction of the populace, at least in the North American region, seems to be getting underway at this time. But now for the cataclysmic reset. And this will tie into my father's side of our family story. According to my story, our earliest roots can also be traced to Spain. Way back. My family originates here and has the last name of Levi or Levy. And here, in my oldest family story, we have the Spanish Inquisition in 1478. And again, this is my oldest story. I was told this as a child before I understood anything about it. And most recently, I have picked my father's brain for every detail. And he doesn't really care as much as I do. But yet he has carried and preserved and believes this story. So in 1478, Queen Isabella kicked my family out of Spain. Queen Isabella said everybody in Spain will convert to Catholicism or leave or die. 3 choices. And with those choices, my family, along with many others, opted to leave Spain. In my case, they went to Italy, specifically Venice, and they changed their name to the city of Venice, or Venezia, and here would enjoy peace for some time as merchants of clothing, until again being forced to relocate via war, and in my family's history would relocate to Salonika, Greece. And this is where my grandfather would be born. My grandfather was born into such a poor family that he left at 15 to join the French Foreign Legion just to eat. And shortly after he left, Salonika was bombed and his parents died, along with most of his family. Shortly after the war, he relocated to Oran, Algeria, and this is where my father would be born. At the time, it was part of France, and eventually would become ravaged by political instability, and again they would relocate. Eventually my father traveled the world and found himself in Montreal at the World's Fair, where he would meet my mother. But back to my point, being the reset. And again, as I started out by saying, I don't know. I'm just sharing my family story. And my family, on my father's side, going back to 1478 at least, leads me to believe that the last major reset happened before this date. And that's if we're using our timeline. So again, a recap. The hard plasma reset seems to have occurred before the Spanish Inquisition, and the introduction of people seems to be ongoing, seems to be part of the rearranging of the narrative by the controllers. But what we see from the photographic evidence is, it seems, as far as the Americas are concerned, the real introduction to the populace is taking place beginning around 1850 and onward. In conclusion, I'm left with the notion that after the reset, there were many survivors scattered across the realm. These people availed themselves of what remaining infrastructure existed. In the case of Spain and several other European countries, they inherited the best of the infrastructure and technologies, or at least what was still functional, and that would allow them to conquer the rest of the survivors in the realm. It's also safe to say that this same group has rewritten our history, and quite possibly is still in control today. And I think that's all I can say about that. I certainly went over 5 minutes, but I think it was worth it. And here's a nice share from Dylan. I thank you for this. I don't think I have much to say about this. It deals with the late alchemist Fulcanelli, we've discussed him before, and his book, The Mysteries of the Cathedrals, in which originally only 300 copies were printed and said to have been distributed to a reserved few. What I didn't know is he had a final book in the works, which had been partially worked on, but not complete due to his death. This final book was to be called Fini Gloria Mundi. So let's have a little look at these little snippets that were sent to us so kindly by Dylan. And this is the part I wanted to focus on. Just some little notes he had. And mind you, this is 100 years ago, a little more. And what did he want to elaborate on? Perhaps we in this community are simply finishing his work. As we see here written, earthly evidence of the end of the world. And here he tells us what is the earthly evidence of the end of the world, or as we now call them, the resets. We have here the 4 ages, as we've discussed. I made a video on this, told to us in some of the earliest writings we have. The 4 ages of man that, as they progress, seem to decline. Knowledge is lost, people live shorter lives, they're weaker, less intelligent, and creative. Now he goes into the successive cycles sealed in geological layers. What do we call this? The mud flood. He had no other way to explain this. Next we have fossils, and again, things that our community examines that make no sense. Fossils of both small and massive creatures, and enough anomalies to flip the timeline on its head. Next he says, vanished flora and fauna. That might be another clue for us. However, we see vanishing everything. That is part of the reset, and the false narrative that's propagated thereafter. Vanishing people, nations, land masses, and many more. Human skeletons. Ding, ding, ding. Many human, and thousands by now, of giant skeletons, just to name one variety, have been carted off by the Smithsonian and put into basements, as we know very well by now. This practice has been going on for over 100 years. And we also have the elongated skulls, or humanoid skeletons, not only actually preserved in museums in Peru, but throughout the arts of all peoples throughout this realm. Many examples of an advanced people with elongated heads having existed. This one I'm not sure about. Perhaps you could let me know. Again, something I will investigate after this segment. Next we have monuments of so-called prehistorical mankind. And this is exactly what we research. The architecture, the monuments that make no sense, as if the people had a force of labor at their disposal and unlimited funds and resources, and no doubt Fulcanelli was exposed to this in Paris. Even our very Washington monument just falls apart when examining the narrative. So our next section, he goes into the cosmic causes of upheaval, and here again he points out several anomalies. Right away, what jumps out at me is the error in the Copernican system, demonstrated by the pole star. Anyone with half a brain should notice this, but most people today don't look up, and if they did, may not give any deep thought to the matter, just noticing how pretty everything is, which it is. The precession of the equinoxes, the inexplicable variations in the magnetic pole, and here at the bottom look what he says. Solar ascension at the pole's zenith and return in the opposite direction, causing the reversal of the axis, the deluge and fusion at the surface of the plane. So here again, noticing the revolution around the North Pole, the cycle completing itself and reversing, creating our reset, and here he calls this the deluge and fusion. And again, are we just running late since Fulcanelli's death? I don't know. Perhaps Fulcanelli lived in the past reset, and his works have been redated. He is a man of absolute mystery, and his work is timeless. It would apply to any time period. Just a thought. I don't want to speculate too much today. I just wanted to share what has been shared with me. And I think that's it for today. Just as I was wrapping up the video, the book that I'm reading to you just arrived, and full of mind-blowing stuff already. But I think I'll reserve that for another video. Do have a blessed day. Thanks for joining me, and we'll see you next week.